So, we'll go ahead and kinds of unbelief. I'm going to start out with the scriptures of a very familiar story, if I will. In Matthew chapter 17, and I actually got a lot of revelation on this just this year from watching Andrew Womack. So let's read these two stories, these two accounts of the same story, one in Matthew, one in Mark. In the first one it says, and this is right after the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus and Peter, James, and John come down. And when they had come down to the multitude, there came to him a certain man, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic, and sore vexed. For oftentimes he falleth into the fire, and often into the water. And I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. And then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. And then came the disciples to Jesus apart, and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. Okay? Now that's the understood subject. They asked him why. He told them why. Because of your unbelief. And then he went on to tell them, For verily I say unto you, if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed hence yonder and place, and it should remove. And nothing shall be impossible to you. Howbeit, this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. Now, before we read the other account, that last verse, verse 21, this kind goeth out only by prayer and fasting, was actually not put in a number of translations, the NIV being one of them. They just, I don't know if it was for lack of understanding or, but really there is no devil that is less subject to the name of Jesus than any other. I mean, they're all defeated. So the understood subject here is why couldn't we do it? Because of your unbelief. And what I want to get to is there are different kinds of unbelief. And I want to read Mark now. Let's go to Mark chapter 9 and read that one. And when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, meaning the other 9, and the scribes questioning them. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. And he asked the scribes, What question ye with them? And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And forsoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth, and gnasheth with his teeth, and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. And he answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? And how long shall I suffer you? Bring him to me. And they brought him unto him. And when he saw him, straightway the spirit tare him. And he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming. And he asked his father, How long is it ago since this came upon him? And he said, Of a child. And oftentimes it hath cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And then when Jesus saw the people come running together, he rebuked the foul spirit and said unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him and enter no more into him. And the spirit cried and rent him sore and came out of him. And he was as one dead, insomuch as many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Okay, again, I think in this, Jesus had already said to the disciples, of course, in Mark, it's after all this, in the next few verses, they asked him, why couldn't we do it? And he said, because of your unbelief. But I think the Father knew that. And that's why he asked him, help thou my unbelief. He had faith. He believed. But he also had unbelief. And this kind of unbelief, and in studying after this a little bit, some of the translations call it a spirit of unbelief. Now, let me qualify some of what I'm going to say now. The devil and all of his host were defeated 2,000 years ago at Calvary. And the only thing that they have left is that he's the god of this world, and they have thoughts, ideas, and suggestions. Those are the only three weapons that they have at their disposal. And if they can get you to buy in with those, then you've given place to the devil. And he'll bring about whatever stealing, killing, and destroying that he can, because that's his job. But he doesn't have the power or authority that he used to. They're all defeated. And so we need to be aware of what they do. Now, there's three kinds of unbelief. And the first kind is no knowledge. And that would be in Romans 10:14. You can't believe something that you don't know. Then how shall they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? So, if you don't know about something, you can't believe in it. And then the second kind of unbelief is wrong teaching. You can go ahead and put that scripture up there, Mark 7. Today there is much error taught as truth. God's will is his word. Unteaching error is almost as hard as unteaching walking by senses, which is the next one. Howbeit, in Mark 7, howbeit in vain do they worship me and teach for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, they hold the traditions of men as the washing of pots and cups and many other such things that they do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandments of God, that you may keep your own traditions. Now, let me qualify that by saying I grew up a heathen child, but I was born into a Presbyterian family. And I used to affectionately tell people Presbyterians were famous for believing nothing. But I've since learned better. But there are multitudes of people that go to churches across America and around the world that think sometimes it's God's will, that he put this disease or this sickness on them or to teach them something. There are people that believe that because they were taught that. That's wrong teaching. And to try and get them out of that, if that's been something they've been believing forever, you got to take them back to John 10:10. The thief comes not but for to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. That is the cornerstone of believing, of being able to recognize what's right and what's wrong. Okay, the third kind is sensory unbelief. And you can go ahead and put up Matthew 14. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, and the wind was contrary. So we know it's wavy and windy, right? And on the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It's a spirit." And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke to them and saying, "Be of good cheer, for it is I. Be not afraid." And Peter said to him, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come on the water." Didn't leave much room for Jesus to do anything else. He had to say, "Come." And when Peter came down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand, caught him, and said unto him, "O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt?" And when they had come into the ship, the wind ceased, and they were all in the ship. And then they were all in the ship and came and worshipped him, saying, "Of a truth, thou art the Son of God." So, one word from God to Peter could do something for Peter that I can only do in February. Walk on the water. I do that usually every February, and I drill holes in it and fish for fish. But I have not walked on the water while it's still water. But one word from God was enough to get Peter to walk on the water. But yet, he was distracted by his sensory perception. Now, what did the wind and the waves have to do with him walking on the water? Absolutely nothing. But see, he had his eyes on Jesus when he got out of that ship, and he was thinking about that word, "come," and it empowered him. But when his sensory perception saw things that were contrary to that word, "come," and walk on the water, basically, he began to sink. Having more faith in what we see, taste, hear, smell, or feel than what God says, like Peter, it is easy to let this kind of unbelief slip in. I have had this, and we all will have this challenge until we're taken home to be with the Lord. This is just something that the devil does, and I really believe that all of his demons and imps and whatever his host is, they all have assignments, and many of them are named by their assignment or different things. And I think there's a spirit of unbelief that uses the circumstances that we're in to distract us from what God said. Unbelief cancels faith. Matthew 17:20. And Jesus said unto them, "Because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, you would say to this mountain, Be removed from yonder place, and it should remove, and nothing would be impossible to you." Okay, then I had Mark 9:24. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief." Here's a story that I got from listening to this. If you had an arena, and Candy likes horses, if you had an arena and you had a barrel in the middle of that arena with 200 pounds of sand in it, that'd be kind of hard to move around in an arena full of dirt. But you bring out a 1,500-pound Clydesdale named Faith and hook him up to that barrel, and buddy, he's going to drag it all over the place. Faith can move it. But now you bring out another horse named Unbelief of the same size and strength and hook it to the other side of that barrel, and they can both pull. But the results of the barrel are zero. So faith or unbelief will cancel your faith. which was an excellent analogy for me to help understand why sometimes things just didn't go the way I wanted them to in my life when I was praying and believing God for something and it didn't happen. Why do we walk by faith and not by sight? Mark 16 and 14. Afterwards, he appeared unto the 11 and said unto them, and they sat at meat, and he upbraided them or scolded them for their unbelief and hardness of their hearts, because they believed not them which had seen him after he was risen. And I think that was Thomas. But, even after he's risen and sitting with them, they still didn't believe. They still didn't grasp it. I think a lot of times they didn't. I used to, and I repented of this, but I used to call them the 11 Stooges, because it seemed like they were constantly messing up. But see, they didn't have a lot of the knowledge and foresight that we have. Of course, we didn't have a lot of the experiences they had. But either way, another story on this that I got from this was Andrew Womack was he's older than me, so he's an old mighty man of God. But in his younger days, he had a healing service, and he was feeling his oats. He'd had a number of great successes. And in this service, he saw a pretty good-sized guy in a wheelchair. And right away, he's thinking of Peter and John when they went to the Gate Beautiful, and the guy was looking for alms, and they got him some feet. Yanked him up. So Andrew walks over to this guy, and he's going to pray for him. And he grabs him and yanks him up out of this wheelchair, and they both went down. Big guy. And the gasp across the crowd was audible, and the first thought that ran through Andrew's mind was lawsuit. The obvious. This guy didn't get healed when he put the name of Jesus on him. He yanked him up out of that chair, and down they went. And he was a young man at that time, and he still struggled to get the guy back in the chair, but he was mad at God a little bit. And he asked me, he said, why? Why did that happen to me? Why couldn't I get that guy healed? Why? And like me, when I've asked God things with that attitude, you don't get your answer right away. Mine came 25 years later on one of them. And I'm not going to procrastinate on that, but God will wait until you're ready to receive your answer. Well, Andrew was reading this autobiography about Smith Wigglesworth, written by his son-in-law, and he got to this part where he was telling the story that Smith would always call or say, the first one up here will get healed, and then you're all going to sit down, I'm going to teach, and then we'll have prayer and healing. Being that you use your faith to get the first one healed, and then everybody else's faith is built up, and it's easier to knock them all down then. That was his working theory. So, and it was well known, well documented. So these two nurses had brought this woman who was, I don't know if they knew about cancer then, but that's what it was. I think they called it consumption. But she was nothing but skin and bones. And she had a belly like mine. But she was thin and couldn't stand up, couldn't walk, couldn't stand up by herself. And these two nurses had her in the front row. And when Smith came out and started his service, he said, first one up here will get healed. And man, these nurses jumped up, pulled that lady up, and they were the first ones up there. And, Smith looked at her and said, okay, turn her loose. And they looked at him, turned her loose, boom, she fell down. And the whole crowd gasped. And he said, pick her up. They picked her up. And he said, turn her loose. And they said, we can't. And this man from the crowd yelled, leave her alone, you beast. And Smith rebuked him. He said, you mind your own business, because I know my business. And he said, turn her loose. And anyway, the third time they turned her loose, she stumbled and went to fall, and the tumor fell out of her dress. And she was healed. She caught herself. She stood up. When Andrew read that in that book, it was a time for the Lord to answer his question, why couldn't he do that? It was because of your unbelief. You know, he told Andrew, in a sense, you had as much faith that day as Smith did. The difference was Smith knew his business and did not let sensory unbelief negate his faith. And when he told that story, I thought, wow, that was the first time I'd ever heard that. That unbelief, you know, I knew unbelief. I'd read Kenneth Hagin's books on the enemies of faith and fear and, you know, all the things that are in there. But it never really dawned on me that we have to be first responders and be not let that get, you know, a 90-foot head start on us. We gotta know our God, we gotta know our word, and we gotta stand strong. So anyway, warnings of results of unbelief. Romans 11, 19 through 23. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. This is talking about the Jews and the Gentiles. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off, that thou standest by faith. But be not high-minded, but fear, and that word fear is I think should be reverent. For if God spared not the natural branch, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Why? Because of unbelief. I threw that in there. Behold, before the goodness and severity of God on them which fell, severity, but towards thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou shalt be cut off. And they also, if they abide, meaning the Jews, if they come back and abide, or if they shall abide not still in unbelief, they shall be grafted back in, for God is able to graft them in again. So what hinders us from everything that God has for us, including salvation, is we get it by faith. And we can, you know, according to this, it can be lost by unbelief. We need to be very diligent about unbelief. It is one of those things that the devil uses, and he'll use circumstances. There's a new word that Brother Hockaday brought the other day when he was praying for people, and I was out here catching, so I got to hear a lot of them. But he called a lot of the things that people were suffering drama. And there is so much drama that is in the world, and naturally, if that's what you're looking at, even a little bit, drama is going to be prevalent in your life. And drama is sensory unbelief. My son and I, here's another story before I get on. My son and I used to watch a show called Top Shot. All you guys that have guns might know what that is. It was like a reality show for people that were marksmen. And I was really drawn to that, me and my son. But man, the drama, these guys would at each other. So me and my son started recording it and then come back and watch it later and fast forward, skip through all the drama. Because, I probably have my share of other kinds of drama, but that one wasn't it. I could not handle that kind of drama. For in the last days, we need to fight the good fight of faith and not let any unbelief get in our way. And how do we do that? What was Jesus' answer on why they couldn't cast that out? This kind of unbelief only goes forth by prayer and fasting. So, if you've got drama in your life, or if you've got different kinds of unbelief, a lot of times it's wrong teaching. It's hard to get rid of. Some of it's real hard to get rid of. And I'll testify to that. And it takes prayer and fasting. Distractions must be resisted, like the wind and the waves of life. Distractions must be resisted, like anything that goes against what our God says. And what he says is right here in the Word. And the Word is his will. So in 2 Corinthians 5:7 it says, "For we walk by faith and not by," what is sight? It's one of the five. And see, that word sight represents all five of the physical senses. When you walk by faith and not by your sensory perception. Think of it that way. And why do we do that? Because that sensory perception will bring unbelief. Is it possible? If God told us to do it, then it must be possible to walk by faith and not by sight. So that's pretty much what I've got so far. There's a lot of other areas and experiences of unbelief that may come to mind to you as an individual. I have many of my own. Like I said, I don't walk on water. I know one guy that's blind, and pretty much since I first got saved, over 40 years ago. And I pined away at is it time for me to just go up and grab him? And when I first got saved and I wanted to pray for people to get well or to receive their sight or whatever, I had fear. What do people think if he doesn't get it? Oh, man. Why should I care? It's, the miracle of receiving sight isn't up to me. What's up to me is to have faith to pray for it and lay hands on them. And to, as Charles and Francis Hunter say, pull the trigger of faith. Man, I've been watching their stuff too. And I like that. Pull the trigger of faith. Put that on Jesus' name. And watch. Don't close your eyes. I used to close my eyes when I would pray. We need to have our eyes open, our sensory perception open to the miracles of God instead of all the unbelief. So now when I pray, I got my eyes open. I expect to see God move. I expect to see miracles and healings and financial breakthrough. And now, in all of this that I've said today, how does that tie into what Pastor Lonnie does overseas with such great results and not so much in the U.S.? Unbelief. They don't have plan B, like he said. They're expecting God to do it, and he will. He'll do it here too. But if we have that same horse of unbelief hooked up to that barrel, the barrel ain't going to move. We need to be diligent. We need to recognize what the devil does. So I'm gonna let it go at that, and we're going to pray. And if anybody needs anything from this afterwards, you come on up and we'll pray. If you need healing, I'm going to get Pastor John up here. But and because if one can put 1,000 to flight, two can put 10. You get twice as much faith for healing or whatever, it works. Lord, I thank you for your word and your revelation in your word, where you help us to see and recognize